Welcome back. Let's just dive right into today's explainer, because we're unpacking a seriously fascinating concept, the agentic self. We hear so much buzz lately about agentic AI, machines acting on what they know, but almost no one's asking the much harder question. What does it actually take for you to act on what you know? The wildest part of the research we're looking at today? It points out that deep down, knowing what to do was never actually your issue. You've already got the knowledge. So today, we're going to map out the real mechanics behind our behaviors and figure out how we can finally, actually, take the steering wheel back. So tell me if this sounds familiar. Have you ever felt this just massive gap between knowing what you're supposed to do and actually pulling it off? For a lot of incredibly smart people, it's not even a gap. It's a full-blown canyon. You see the other side perfectly, but you just can't get yourself to cross it. Our source material describes this perfectly. It says you're essentially a Ferrari engine running on a bicycle transmission. And whatever you're using to temporarily bridge that gap, scrolling on a screen, some random distraction, it's really important to get that it's not a moral failing. It's not laziness. It is purely a mechanical relief problem. Right, so the big question is, why is that canyon there in the first place? Think about the last time you were about to step into a really high-stakes meeting, or maybe gear up for a tough conversation. You know that heavy rock in your stomach feeling? Did you literally pre-live the whole catastrophe in your head before it even happened? Like you hear the awkward silence, you vividly picture the disappointment on their faces, and then, almost like magic, the whole thing plays out exactly as horribly as you dreaded. I mean, why does that happen? Well, to get to the bottom of that, we have to completely smash this huge myth we carry around about how our minds work. Most of us just naturally assume our perception is this passive mirror, like a GoPro strapped to our foreheads, just accurately recording reality as it happens, right? But the research shows our mind is absolutely not a mirror. It is a highly aggressive control system. It's way more like a relentless, obsessive movie director. And this director has already written the script. It's actively manufacturing reality, barking out orders, and setting the mood just to make sure the real world matches its specific vision. And the incredibly fascinating mechanism driving this inner director is what we call top-down predictions. Now, why on earth would our brain do this? Simply put, biological efficiency. Think about it. If your brain had to compute every single photon of light and every tiny sound wave in a busy coffee shop completely from scratch every time you walked in, you'd be paralyzed by all the data. So, to save energy, your brain uses a massive shortcut. It generates an expectation based on your past, and it quite literally tells your eyes and ears what to experience before you've even crossed the threshold of the room. Let's look at how this actually plays out in real life with what we can call the boardroom disaster loop. Say you predict your pitch is going to fail. Step 1. Your perception instantly becomes biased. You walk into the room and your brain physically filters out the person smiling and nodding at you, and it laser focuses on the one investor checking their phone. Your brain turns into like a terrible date that only sees red flags. You're literally hallucinating a hostile room. Then, step 2. That biased perception triggers defensive action. You cross your arms, your voice gets a little thin, you start avoiding eye contact, which leads right into step 3, the negative result. The room picks up on that awkward defensive energy, they check out, and the meeting wraps up early. You physically cause the exact rejection you were terrified of. Okay, I want to slow down here for just a second, because you're probably thinking, if I'm doing this to myself, how do I not notice it? And that all comes down to cognitive transparency. Imagine putting on a pair of rose-tinted sunglasses. At first, everything looks red, but leave them on long enough and your brain just adjusts. You completely forget you even have lenses on, and you just start believing the white wall in front of you is actually pink. You're looking through the lens, not at it. Because you don't feel that top-down prediction happening in the background, the output just feels like undeniable objective reality. And guys, this is the absolute tragedy of transparency. When you walk out of that failed pitch we just talked about, you genuinely believe you're just a neutral observer reporting on a terrible reality. You're thinking, see, I totally knew my idea was garbage. You have absolutely no clue that you just performed its massive act of construction. It's like you're sitting in a dark prison cell, completely convinced whoever built it had it out for you, totally oblivious to the fact that the mortar is literally still on your own hands. Now, bombing a pitch is an acute, isolated thing. But what happens when that transparent lens gets super glued to your face? Psychology research points to this terrifying mental shift called reification. This is exactly how a temporary stumble turns into a chronic disease. Think of a river. It's flowing, dynamic, it's a verb. Say a bad storm hits and makes it all muddy and gross. Reification is basically taking a Polaroid of that muddy water, staring at the photo every single day, and convincing yourself that the entire river is just a permanently frozen block of dirty ice. You completely forget it was ever moving in the first place. So in a healthy mindset, you might look at a setback and say, I failed at this specific presentation, right? That's a fluid verb. It's temporary, it has clear boundaries. But when reification takes over, that fluid process violently compresses into this rigid, heavy noun. I am a failure. Do you see the difference? It's no longer something you did. It instantly becomes something you are. The fluidity of the verb is just totally gone. And once that solid noun forms in your head, it becomes what cognitive science calls a high-level prior. Think of this like the root directory of your mind's operating system. A low-level prior, like, say, expecting a pen to drop when you let go of it, that's easy to update if things change. But a high-level prior, that is foundational. When I am a failure gets installed in that root directory, your brain literally stops asking if you're going to fail. It treats your failure as a settled law of physics, like gravity. It just starts asking how you're inevitably going to fail today. And here's the kicker. Once this failure identity sets up shop, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It fights tooth and nail to survive. Your self-model will ruthlessly defend this miserable state just to keep internal order, using 3 distinct defense mechanisms. And honestly, what's totally staggering in the source material is that these mechanisms function exactly like a profound chemical addiction. Your brain actually prioritizes the coherence of its model, even if it's making you miserable, over your actual real-life happiness. So let's break down how it defends the fortress. The first line of defense is just straight-up dismissing success. If you actually nail a presentation, your brain suddenly has a huge metabolic problem on its hands. Accepting that you're capable of success means it has to rewrite that entire foundational operating system, and that is exhausting. So to save energy, it just violently filters out the win. You immediately tell yourself, oh, they were just in a good mood today, total fluke. On the flip side, the brain actively guarantees failure through behavioral confirmation. If you deeply believe people will always abandon you, you might unconsciously pick this massive, totally irrational fight with a great partner, literally just to push them away and prove your dark prediction right. Let's just pause on that for a second. That is an incredibly heavy thought. Why on earth would the human nervous system prefer a predictable nightmare over the possibility of a dream? Why are we spending so much immense cognitive energy actively keeping ourselves miserable? Just let that sink in. Well, the answer comes down to the paradox of safety and vulnerability. And hearing this is absolutely crucial, because this isn't some deep character flaw of yours. It's literally just your brain trying, and tragically failing, to protect you. See, hope is incredibly vulnerable. When you hope, you open yourself up to a massive potential prediction error. If you hope for a promotion and you don't get it, that genuine disappointment is neurologically chaotic. So the failure identity acts as a shield. Sure, it's a brittle, painful model, but it is highly stable. If you already know for a fact you're a failure, the world makes terrible but complete sense. Your brain violently clings to a broken identity because predictable failure feels way safer than the chaotic vulnerability of the unknown. But thankfully, the research doesn't just leave us hanging. It offers a way out, and it's basically about hitting reverse through a process called de-reification. If reification was taking that photo of the muddy river and calling it solid ice, de-reification is choosing to put the photograph down, walking back over to the riverbank, and just watching the muddy water flow again. You acknowledge the mud, sure, but you recognize it as a temporary process, not a permanent solid object. You realize the water can eventually clear up. You're learning to look at the transparent lens, rather than constantly looking through it. Okay, so how do we physically rewire this machine? There are 3 steps to essentially escape the matrix. Step 1, you have to intentionally introduce prediction errors. Now, your brain absolutely hates prediction errors, so you kind of have to force feed them to it like vegetables. Let's say you're tackling a hard task, and your brain predicts you're going to give up. You introduce a tiny glitch. You decide, I'm going to engage with this for exactly 20 minutes, no matter how much I panic. You refuse to use the escape hatch. By simply not running away, you're forcing your brain to encounter real-world data that completely contradicts its own script. And that brings us to the return of staring. Step 2 is rebuilding your narrative model. You have to actively catalog those small wins from your 20-minute experiments. You have to deliberately look for the exceptions to your failure rule and consciously force your perspective to widen. Then comes step 3, and this is the required existential trade. Listen closely to this. You have to trade your miserable, depressing certainty for the messy uncertainty of hope. You literally have to be willing to look at the world and say, I genuinely do not know what's going to happen today, and I am willing to risk the prediction error to find out. Our minds are these incredibly powerful engines of creation, right? The reality you experience every day is heavily directed by the script your self-model has written. But please remember, that script is not permanent. It's just a verb that got frozen into a noun. The hard, totally necessary work is finding the courage to thaw out that frozen identity, tolerate the scary uncertainty of hope, and actually reclaim your agency. So I'll leave you with this exciting invitation. Are you ready to fire that hostile director and take back the steering wheel? Try exploring your own cognitive mechanics this week. Push for those little prediction errors and just see what happens. Catch you next time.